مرحبا بكم مشاهدينا في حوارات السياق. كشف مصدر دبلوماسي لوكالة الأنباء الألمانية أن الرئيس الأمريكي جو بايدن سيزور السعودية قبل نهاية يونيو، متحدثا عن قمة خليجية أمريكية بمشاركة عربية في مدينة جدة. المصدر قال إن اتفاقا مبدئيا تم بين الرياض وواشنطن على أن يصل الرئيس الأمريكي إلى جدة في الأسبوع الأخير من يونيو في زيارة رسمية للمملكة يلتقي خلالها العاهل السعودي الملك سلمان بن عبد العزيز وولي عهده الأمير محمد بن سلمان. للمزيد من المتابعة حول هذا الملف ينضم إلينا نورمان مساعد مدير وكالة الاستخبارات الأمريكية السابق. أستاذ نورمان، مرحبا بك معنا.
Thank you for having me.
إذن أكثر من مصدر إعلامي ودبلوماسي تحدثوا عن زيارة مرتقبة لجو بايدن إلى السعودية ولقاء مع ولي العهد السعودي الأمير محمد بن سلمان. هل ذاب الجليد؟
I think it's a reasonable idea that the United States president would visit the Middle East, and visiting the Middle East is not something a U.S. president can do without having an encounter with a variety of senior-most partners, to include the King of Saudi Arabia and the Crown Prince. The president has visited Asia, he's visited Europe. The Middle East is going to be inevitably part of his travel as well. In terms of the connections between the United States, relations have significantly improved in recent weeks and months, as the United States and Saudi Arabia have increased communications and meeting frequency in order to see how they can develop more common areas for cooperation.
سؤالي كان مبنيا على ما ذكرته صحيفة وول ستريت جورنال التي قالت إن ولي العهد السعودي ورئيس الإمارات رفض اتصالات هاتفية من جو بايدن. ما الذي تغير الآن؟
Well, first, my understanding is those stories were somewhat exaggerated. I think what you have is that the United States administration was very clear that it came to power looking to move to China, Europe, climate change, social issues in the United States, and reduce its political emphasis on the Middle East. Iran's malign activities and aggression continued, and regional countries such as Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, were upset that the international community, to include the United States, was not paying sufficient focus to their legitimate security requirements regarding Iran. The administration has since undertaken a number of steps to demonstrate that it is committed to regional security. But beyond that, there have also been a number of visits of Saudi officials meeting with different parts of the American private sector and parts of the American government in order to build upon existing relationships. And the private sector relationship with Saudi Arabia and the United States is really quite good.
ولي العهد السعودي الأمير محمد بن سلمان التقى أمس أعضاء من الكونغرس الأمريكي لمناقشة القضايا ذات الاهتمام المشترك. ما هي هذه القضايا المشتركة؟ وهل هذا اللقاء كان تمهيدا لاجتماع بايدن وبن سلمان؟
The meeting between the Saudi Crown Prince and three American congressmen and congresswomen and two congressmen, I think, was a normal engagement, and I don't think it had anything to do with any potential visit by the U.S. president to the region. But the nature of the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia, and indeed with the other states of the Gulf Cooperation Council, is far broader than energy. There's trade security in important waterways such as the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandab, the Strait of Hormuz. We have an enormous private sector technology presence in the region on issues ranging from tourism, space, cyber issues. It's just a vast relationship between the two countries. And I think the congressional visits were in line with that. Now, this said, I am certain that the issue of security came up in terms of threats by Iranian proxies such as the Houthis and Iran itself. And this congressional delegation of Republicans was probably sympathetic to Saudi concerns.
سأكون أكثر مباشرة هنا. هل هذا يعني أن المسائل العالقة بين البلدين، مواضيع الطاقة وأوبك والاتفاق النووي مع إيران وغيرها، قد حلت؟
No, and indeed the various countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council, as well as other Arab partners in the region, have repeatedly made it clear that they're at the very least uncomfortable, if not unhappy with the planned nuclear discussions with Iran because they believe that no matter what sort of deal is ever agreed, it will end up providing Iran with resources that Iran will use to empower proxies that attack the citizens of the region, to include Americans. Um, at the same time, when it comes to other issues that are underway between the two countries, I don't think these were standing in the way of trade relations, legitimate long-term security issues such as Red Sea piracy, and keeping the zones of travel for trade in the region open.
موقع أكسيوس قال إن ولي العهد قدم للمسؤولين الأمريكيين قائمة بالخطوات التي يجب أن تتم قبل الزيارة. باعتقادك ما هي هذه الخطوات؟
So I think it's important to understand that whenever there is a discussion of a senior U.S. official, be it a president or a cabinet member to the region, prior to that, each side will exchange a list of things they'd like to achieve. And they do this so that when the visit takes place, there can be signings of agreements, there can be finalizing discussions or very candid discussions as to what steps are needed to go forward. I am aware of these discussions between Saudi Arabia and the United States, but I can assure you they certainly are not demands, and they fall into just expanding trade, financial issues, defense issues, improving the cooperation that's needed so that Saudi Arabia can defend itself from Iranian missiles and drones. And this is really not out of the ordinary. And in fact, before President Biden would have visited Asia, a similar exchange would have taken place between each of the countries that he visited, and that enables him to sign agreements upon arrival.
على الجانب الأمريكي ما هي المطالب؟ جاك سوليفان قال إنه ناقش مسألة إنتاج النفط مع السعودية. هل تتوقع أن تقود الرياض تغييراً في وتيرة الإنتاج داخل أوبك؟
Well, there's no question that the Biden administration would like OPEC and particularly Saudi Arabia to increase oil production, believing that it would reduce the prices for gasoline in the United States. I don't believe that an increase by OPEC would have a significant impact on those prices in the long term, certainly, because refineries are already working at capacity within the United States. But I do believe that the Biden administration would certainly like to see more production from Saudi Arabia. Now, from the Saudi perspective, they place great importance on market stability, discipline within OPEC, a need to make sure that that OPEC does not undergo a price war such as we saw last year, and for Saudi Arabia to suddenly start producing another 1 million barrels a day, which would take them near the limits of their capacity. They would run into some very difficult political discussions with other OPEC members. So I don't think Saudi Arabia is going to rush to provide that extra capacity, but I do believe OPEC will likely continue to increase its production to meet the existing deal, which means about 400,000 barrels more each month.
بالنسبة لبايدن هل ستسبب له الزيارة إلى السعودية مشاكل في الداخل مع اقتراب الانتخابات؟
There is certainly an element to the American left which would like to see very minimal relations with Saudi Arabia because of the Khashoggi murder. And there are elements of the far left and the far right who wish to see very limited relations with multiple countries, to include those within the region. I don't believe, however, based upon my discussions with American congressional representatives, that there will be a vast amount of unhappiness that would be politically decisive for any sort of engagement of the president in the region. And I should underscore that if the president were to come to the region, he would likely see a number of leaders if such a deal would take place, much as when he went to Asia and Europe, he saw a number of leaders during those visits.
وكأني أفهم من حديثك أنك تتوقع أيضا قمة خليجية أمريكية خلال هذه الزيارة يتم ربما فيها حل كل المسائل العالقة بما في ذلك العلاقة المتوترة مع الإمارات.
Well, I think that's a bit complicated, but I can say that certainly when American presidents visit a region, the scale and nature of discussions lend themselves to group group meetings. And we've just seen in Asia such a meeting, and we've seen in Europe such a meeting. So if you saw a Gulf meeting, but also an encounter that included the president of Egypt, the king of Jordan, separate meetings with the Israelis, for example, that would fit the pattern of how American presidents undertake visits to any region, to include the Middle East.
كانت هناك تسريبات عن وساطة أمريكية مع مصر وإسرائيل والسعودية لترسيم الحدود فيما يتعلق بتيران وصنافير. هل لك أن تشرح لنا هذه الدينامية الدبلوماسية خارج إطار العلاقة المتوترة حاليا؟
Well, I saw the report, and I believe the language of that report may be somewhat incorrect. First, this is an issue that has been under discussion between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Egypt for some time. It has been in the public that Egypt has talked about returning the islands to Saudi Arabia, which it has controlled since, I believe, 1950. And that there had been some opposition to that within Egypt. Saudi Arabia has long talked about developing the northern area of the Red Sea Basin, and certainly its control of these islands would allow it to integrate those islands into this broader Red Sea economic development. So you can see that happening as well. Last, I think it's very, very clear that we should state the United States does not have the ability to tell either Egypt or Saudi Arabia which portions of their territory they should pass to each other. That's just not what we do. However, it is not unreasonable to think that the United States would say that because of the location of these islands, which are demilitarized based on an agreement with Israel, would bring Saudi Arabia closer into a security zone that Israel has deemed important for many years. At the same time, the entire Red Sea fits that category. So I think this press report may have just been a little too heavy on the impact of these discussions.
بايدن كان التقى خلال اليومين الماضيين برئيس الوزراء الهندي على الرغم من موقفه تجاه روسيا واستمرار بلاده في استيراد النفط الروسي بعد الحرب. هل غيرت إدارة بايدن من نهجها؟ تريد الآن إصلاح العلاقة مع مجموعة الدول التي اتخذت موقفا أقرب إلى الحياد أو هو حيادي من الحرب الأوكرانية؟
I don't think it's changing a position. I think it's a recognition that these countries have very important and strategic interests which cannot be ignored and require a long-term discussion. And this isn't unusual. If we look at Germany, for example, and how Germany dealt with the cutting off of Russian energy supplies of coal, gas, and oil to Germany, this is not a fast thing for Germany to be able to achieve because of what it would mean in terms of a recession, what it would mean in terms of impact on other countries that engage the German economy. The OPEC members, Saudi Arabia, as well as India, have similar strategic economic concerns. And I think the world was looking for an immediate cessation of economic activity. But in reality, such complex issues require discussions so that people can talk about alternative sources of energy, alternative market sources, alternative sources for grain products or chemicals that are derived from corn oil or petrochemical products. And those sorts of discussions are best to take place, and at least at one point, by heads of state. So India is such an important player that it's not unusual this discussion took place. I'd also like to note that India and China are consuming a vast amount or purchasing a vast amount of Russian oil, which Russia is selling at about $29 to $30 under the market price at present. So India just can't ignore the possibility of acquiring such fuel reserves for its population. And that's a hard discussion and a complicated discussion that would take place between the United States and the Indian leadership, involving a lot of experts.
شكرا نورمان راؤول، مساعد مدير وكالة الاستخبارات الأمريكية السابق، للمشاركة معنا في حوارات السياق.
Thank you very much.
مشاهدينا، شكرا على طيب المتابعة. إلى الملتقى.